Los Angeles, California, fall 2007. The air has begun to carry a gentle chill at night, and the golden leaves drift across the sidewalks, stirred by the mild wind from the Pacific. Ethan Walker, a 25-year-old history major at UCLA, returns to his family's old house in the Hollywood Hills, following the death of who had served in World War II, but rarely spoke about it. Among the things Ethan inherits is a heavy steel typewriter made by the brand Erica, built in the 1940s, sitting untouched in a dusty corner of the attic, surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with faded photographs, old newspapers, war medals in velvet boxes, and letters you could barely make out. At first, Ethan thinks of the Erica typewriter as nothing more than a relic, a piece for display, something he might put on a shelf, perhaps a decorative artifact in his apartment. But the moment he lifts it down from the attic beams, the weight in his hands, the cold of the metal, the chipped paint, the smell of old mechanics and oil, something in him stirs. He places it on an old oak desk, shines a flashlight into its corners, notices that some keys are worn smooth, others stiff. A few have small dents. The ribbon is threadbare in places. Driven by curiosity, he loads a clean sheet of paper, positions his fingers above the keys, and types a simple phrase, "Today feels like any other day." What he sees printed on the paper makes his heart stop. Between regular words, interwoven strangely, are fragments that do not belong. Sector 12, no return, western route. They are faint, misaligned, slipping between the lines like secrets reluctant to be revealed. His pulse quickens. At first he doubts his eyes, thinks perhaps the ribbon is faulty, the type misaligned. He removes the ribbon, studies it under the lamp. Underneath the visible layer, he finds a second, darker ribbon or piece of paper tucked in, almost invisible except under tilted light. When he peels it back, he sees parts of messages, wartime dates, 1944, 1945, initials SW, Samuel Walker, references to patrols, rendezvous points, coded instructions, and one sentence in particular: "If I do not come back, tell Clara it was all worth it." Clara. Ethan knows his grandmother's name is not Clara. No one in his family ever mentioned Clara. The name is unfamiliar, yet in that moment, it carries weight. The weight of hidden love, of promises made in voices that war tried to silence. Samuel Walker, who had medals but never claimed stories, who carried portraits of young women yet spoke of no sweetheart lost, who never said more than, "We did our duty," when pressed about the war. Could he have embedded messages in this old Erica? Could Clara be someone his grandfather loved, someone he had to leave behind, someone he thought he might never see again? Ethan sits back, trembling. The attic is quiet. The boards creak. The dusk light slants through the dusty windows, the typewriter humming softly under his fingers. He realizes this is more than a decorative inheritance. It's a puzzle. It's a voice reaching through decades. And something inside him knows that discovering these messages will change everything. The man he thought he knew, the family he thought he understood, the silence they all accepted. If this story moves you like it moved me writing it, give a thumbs up and subscribe. It helps us keep sharing stories that inspire, that touch, that surprise. And now, get ready, because what comes next will change everything. Ethan Walker grew up in a quiet house, perched on one of the winding hills above Los Angeles, a place where the golden California sunlight filtered through eucalyptus branches, casting long, dancing shadows across floors made of worn oak planks. The house belonged to his grandfather, Samuel Walker, a man who had served in World War II, but whose stories were like whispers in a closed room, heard only in fragments, never full accounts, as if Samuel had stored his memories behind locked doors in his mind and chose to keep them there. Ethan remembered photographs on the mantelpiece, Samuel in uniform, his face stern but eyes distant, medals in display cases, glinting in the light but seldom talked about, letters bound with twine and tucked into drawers that were never opened in full daylight. As a boy, Ethan wondered what the silence meant, but found that his questions often met only a shake of the head or a change of subject, so he learned early that some corners of family history stayed shut. When Samuel passed away, the household quietly slipped into mourning. The presence of his absence was felt in halls that smelled of in rooms lacking his slow footsteps, his throat-clear voice giving family updates or reminiscing by the fireplace. Among the items Ethan inherited was an old Erica typewriter, its steel body still weighty, its keys coated with a fine film of dust, its ribbon loose in its spools. The desk around it cluttered with maps, war journals, faded snapshots, and boxes of letters in envelopes, yellowing with age. Ethan carried the Erica down from the attic, feeling the cold bulk of it, the metallic smell that made him cough slightly, the creak of attic boards under his light shoes. He set it on his desk by a window, late afternoon sun streaming in, drawing motes in the air like tiny dancers, illuminating keys where letters had worn shiny, E, T, S, R especially, and other keys still crisp, almost unused. Some keys pushed back stiffly, others clacked with a loose echo, as though they held grudges for being left idle. Driven by curiosity, which beat in his chest like a second heart, Ethan loaded a fresh sheet of paper, felt the crispness as it slipped into place, centered it under the platen, raised his hands in silent anticipation, and typed a simple, meaningless sentence. "This afternoon, I feel ordinary." He pressed the keys slowly, noting the resistance, the small delays, the way the type bars clanged faintly. Then he slid the ribbon out to read what appeared, but between the ordinary words, shadows of strange insertions. Sector 12, no return, western route, slipped in awkwardly, almost hidden, as though Samuel had typed them in secret, or someone else had added them long ago beneath a normal record, beneath the wallpaper of commonplace typing. Ethan's heart pounded. He reread, removed the ribbon, turned it under a brighter lamp, then found beneath the visible ribbon a second, darker layer of ribbon, or perhaps paper, almost invisible except when the light hit just so. Under that layer, faint imprints of dates, 1944, 1945, initials SW, Samuel Walker, code words, references to patrols and rendezvous points described in shorthand, notes to avoid certain roads, to travel at night, to trust certain voices, to hide messages in ordinary letters so that one glance by outsiders would seem like everyday correspondence. As the attic grew dusky and the sun dipped behind nearby hills, Ethan worked by a single lamp that cast elongated shadows across walls lined with Samuel's military jackets, framed maps of the South Pacific, letters in typed and handwritten form, faded stamps, and photographs of young women, one photograph particularly. A woman in a nurse's uniform, smiling shyly, with a name scribbled faintly on the back, Clara Walker. Ethan's breath caught. His grandmother, whose name he knew well, was not Clara. No one in the family mentioned Clara. Clara was a name in the photograph, in Samuel's typed note, in Samuel's hidden line, and now in Ethan's mind, a whisper of love, maybe a promise, maybe grief. Ethan paused to stare out the attic window at the orange twilight, the haze from smog mingling with smog-lit clouds, the distant hum of traffic, the sparkle of city lights against the gathering darkness. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice, low and hesitant, saying that he had done what he must, that some things could not be spoken aloud, that sometimes safety demanded silence. But then, Clara. If Samuel had written, "If I do not come back, tell Clara it was all worth it," what else had he hidden? What fears, what hopes, what regrets? He reached for a box of envelopes, letters in his grandfather's hand, unsigned, unsealed, some never sent, some with addresses smudged, stamps torn. In some, he saw references to the Navy, to Pacific Islands, to coral and salt water, to nights when the moonlight reflected off the ocean and patrolled boats passed unseen. In others, he saw coded instructions, which beach route to avoid, which supply drop could be trusted, the name Clara hidden in the spaces between numbers and check-in points. Each line seemed to carry more weight than its surface words. Fear pressed into the margins, love pressed between the files. Ethan lay awake that night, his mind alive with sewn-in secrets, thinking of Samuel's old desk, the scratches where he had leaned heavy arms, the blank pages of the journals, the photographs he rarely showed, the strictness in Samuel's manner that hid tender longing. He imagined Clara waiting by a station platform, waiting for Samuel's return, possibly never knowing why he never came, or why he never spoke more of her. He felt, for the first time, that he was not just unearthing documents, but something human. Regret, sacrifice, love unspoken, lives interrupted. And Ethan realized two things. First, that the silence in his family was not just absence, but deliberate, chosen to shield, to protect, to hide vulnerability. Second, that those hidden messages demanded more than discovery. They demanded telling. They demanded bringing light to corners Samuel's lips never parted about. They demanded naming Clara. They demanded truth. In that moment, Ethan closed the attic door softly, his hands stained with ink and dust, his heart full of questions. He stuffed the extra ribbons, the letters, the photographs into a box, turned off the lamp, and watched the attic darken. He understood that what he had inherited was far larger than the typewriter. It was a mission to speak, to piece together, to restore the voice that time tried to bury beneath silence. Ethan spent several nights in his grandfather's attic after that first discovery, the Erica typewriter's weight heavy on his lap, moonlight slanting through a small vented window, dust motes drifting like memories in the still air. He peeled back the darker ribbon, smelled the stale scent of oil and old paper, and began decoding the hidden texts, letter by letter. The messages were fragmented, blotchy ink, smudged by time, sometimes partially torn, but each preserved a sliver of Samuel's secret life, a map of fear, hope, and coded resistance. He found notes about patrols of enemy agents, references to clandestine drop zones in fields long since paved over, mentions of safe houses in unremarkable suburban blocks, instructions to avoid major highways, to use side roads and back alleys, to travel late at night under cover of darkness. Details of weather forecasts, clear sky, moonless, mist near the river, embedded between everyday lines, as though Samuel thought future danger might hinge on such conditions. Mixed in were parts of letters from Clara, not formal, but personal. "I wait by the old oak when the last train passes." Clara was not a name Ethan had heard before. Slipped out of the margins, carried by Samuel's type, part code, part confession. One message dated August 1944 described meeting points by a creek bed behind a farmhouse, coded in directions only locals would understand. Turning at a broken fence post, follow an abandoned irrigation canal, wait until the whistle from the train yard echoes twice, then move east toward the barn with the red door. Ethan remembered that his grandfather used to take walks in those hills, past the old red barn, past the creek. Was that Clara's place? Was Samuel meeting her there? The possibility twisted inside Ethan's mind, tight and painful, like a scar. Another note spoke of deliveries of medicine. Quiet shipments hidden under crates marked fragile, moved through trucks that pretended to be civilian supply. Someone, possibly Samuel, wrote, "If voices outside ears are too close, burn the note. Trust no driver who stops to ask your name." These weren't romantic letters. They were survival instructions, written with love, with terror, with a steady hand. Under one line, scrawled very faintly, Ethan saw, "Tell Clara I carried her hope." Reading in darkness, Ethan sometimes startled at shadows of evening, when the attic creaked, or when a branch tapped the siding. He realized that Samuel's hidden messages were part intelligence, part diary, part love letter. That Clara had lived not only in Samuel's mind, but had formed part of the quiet resistance. Someone who perhaps sewed bandages, whispered safety instructions, relayed messages, waited in the dark for return. Someone who risked everything. Ethan started poring over old maps, 1940s county maps of Los Angeles, rural roads that now are freeways, landmarks that are gone. He visited the county archives, dug through military records, death notices, missing persons reports. Nothing named Clara clearly. Some reports mentioned a nurse who went missing near Chatsworth. Others spoke of wounded soldiers brought to old ranch houses. No one had pieced them together. No one had thought a typewriter might hold answers. One night, Ethan followed a vague lead. An old ranch, burnt down now, but still referred to in Samuel's letters. Behind a hill beyond an old creek they used to go fishing. He stood on the cracked pavement, under street lamps that flickered, listening to distant traffic, smelling sage and smog. Imagine Clara waiting there, perhaps long gone, perhaps only a name preserved in typed letters, in Samuel's quiet, perhaps in Ethan's heart now. Amidst the intelligence-like logs, Ethan also found raw emotions: fear, love, longing. Samuel's typing faltered in some scenes, words misspelled or double-typed, perhaps because hands shook or sleep was scarce, or because he couldn't afford mistakes when each word might cost lives. Clara's lines: "When the skies fall quiet, I hold my breath. If you look for me, look where silence blooms." And Samuel's reply in hidden lines: "Clara, I carry you in the spaces between danger and dawn." Ethan felt his identity shift. The grandfather he knew, a quiet, reserved man who seldom laughed, who wore his medals tucked away in a drawer, was more complicated, more courageous than he had suspected. A man who hid not only war experiences, but love, duty, fear, sacrifice. He wondered how much of Samuel's silence had shaped the household, how Ethan's father never asked, how stories about what we two in the family stayed general and sterile, how Clara's name was absent, how Samuel's eyes flickered when asked whether he wished he had spoken more. Yet Ethan also felt a weight of betrayal, of loss. Why did Samuel marry if Clara was someone different? Did Samuel think Clara dead or unreachable, or was keeping her memory a kind of betrayal of the new family? Did Clara ever know? Did she wait? Was she safe? These unanswerable questions hovered around Ethan. Still, Ethan knew his task: to rescue truth from obscurity, to give Clara a name, to rescue love from fading. He copied every message, every date, every fragment into notebooks. He digitized photos. He recorded his findings. He visited Buripu historians, shared his hypothesis, examined whether civilians in the Hollywood area had helped informally, whether Samuel worked post-war with veterans groups or secret units. One message, almost entirely fragmented, read, "I fear the dawn. But if I must fall, know you were my northern star." Ethan closed his eyes on those words and felt a lurch in his chest. That night, sleep came fitful. He dreamt of Clara wandering through golden poppies, then a flash of burning sky, of Samuel raising his hands in darkness, typing, hiding letters, clutching hope. By the time Ethan closed the attic door and descended into the hallway, something in him had changed. He was no longer only the grandson, but a keeper of stories, a seeker of hidden truths. He felt compelled to bring what was hidden into the light, to read every ribbon, every faded letter, because those fragments mattered, not just to him, but to history, to love, to memory. Ethan discovered, as evening turned night and the attic shadows stretched along the rafters, that what he was unraveling was more than just war log entries and clandestine instructions. It was a tapestry woven of love and regret, of longing buried beneath the noise of bombs, of promises that war demanded be whispered or hidden lest they destroy everything. Among the typed fragments, painstakingly decoded beneath the layer of darker ribbon, were letters that did not read like orders or reports, but like confessions, of hearts that beat in fear yet dared to hope. And in many of those lines, Clara's name appeared, in half-erased phrases, in sentences interrupted by a trembling finger, in passages that spoke of waiting, waiting by the embankment, waiting under the old oak tree, waiting until dawn. Clara had been more than an abstraction. Ethan found a photograph, edges frayed, sepia-toned, of a nurse's uniform, white cap tipped to one side, smile soft, eyes gentle. On the back, Samuel had written by hand in faded ink, "Clara who waits." The presence of that photo startled Ethan. Could Clara have been a nurse in the Pacific Theater, or cared for wounded soldiers at home? Was she known only to Samuel, or to others too? The letters offered glimpses. Clara writing by candlelight in a tent hospital, Clara bandaging wounds, Clara listening to Morse code transmissions at night, her voice in Samuel's mind, her hope, his compass. But then came the breaks. A note. "They say you're gone. I cannot believe words that die so soon." Another. "If this war steals me, carry my love beyond the battlefield." These were more than expressions of affection. They were acknowledgments that war demands sacrifice, not merely of land and ideology, but of the self, of the possibility of peace. Samuel's choice to marry another woman after the war, to build a family with a new line of stability, was not betrayal, but perhaps necessity. But the love for Clara, Ethan realized, had never entirely died. It had been sequestered, coded, preserved within the Erica's clacks and the dusty folds of Typewriter ribbon. The weight of survival pressed upon Samuel. Ethan saw that in the descriptions of nights too cold, of rain seeping into tents, of wounds unclean, of transport delays, of whispers of betrayal among allies, of the cost of a single misstep. Samuel typed, "I do what must be done, but in quiet moments I remember your face." The contrast between laborious duty and tender memory made Ethan's heart ache. He wondered how many soldiers walked through similar shadows with someone waiting somewhere, someone they would not see again, yet someone who inspired them to endure. He also felt guilt, not for Samuel, but for himself, for the silence that had extended into his childhood, the absence of Clara's name around Thanksgiving tables or during war anniversaries, the awkward hush when photographs came out, and for the idea that his grandfather's survival required some voices to fall silent. Ethan realized that recovery wasn't only about finding the name Clara, but understanding the cost. How love compromised by duty becomes a private war. He began imagining Clara reading a letter never sent, perhaps believing Samuel gone, perhaps waiting until hope became memory. One fragment of ribbon carried a passage. "Your letters are lanterns in darkness. I hide them, I burn them, I carry them." The idea of carrying, of transporting hope through charred wires and broken days, struck Ethan. Carrying through survival means embracing scars. He mapped the places Samuel had written about. Hospital tents on Pacific islands, supply routes through jungles, nights when flights crossed danger zones, nights when Clara might have sung lullabies to sick boys in bunker wards. He visualized Clara's uniform, Samuel's hands trembling as he typed her name. Fear and love mingled, keyboard beneath his fingers, oil staining his sleeves, sweat on his brow. In the still of nights, Ethan wrote drafts of a new letter as if to Clara. "If you exist, I remember. If you wait, I carry your name." He wondered if Clara had family in California, if she survived, if she married, if she ever knew the impact she had. He searched records, missing persons documents, correspondence from wartime nurses who served overseas, hoping for a match. Clara H, Clara W, Clara someone. No certainty emerged. Only possibility that she was one among many whose stories had been overshadowed by the chaos of history. In searching, Ethan felt the burden of wanting closure, of not believing silence is a safe refuge when it buries hearts. And yet, in those broken promises, Clara waiting, Samuel hoping, letters unsent, Ethan discovered something essential: that love, even when hidden, does not disappear. That survival is not only about staying alive physically, but about keeping something alive inside: memory, loyalty, hope. Clara, though she may never answer, had become a symbol, not of regret, but of connection between generations. A reminder that people are more than what is spoken, more than medals, more than war stories recited in dry history lectures. By the time Ethan closed the lid of the Erica and carried it downstairs, his hands tired, his mind heavy, he was no longer the same grandson. He felt both more burdened and more free. Burdened by the weight of his grandfather's secret ache, free in knowing that he could tell a more complete story. He felt that the love Samuel bore for Clara, fragile yet unbreakable, would no longer be hidden. And he felt in that nightly quiet that he would honor it, not simply by naming Clara, but by letting Clara's memory stay alive. Ethan stood in the hushed galleries of the National Wapu II Museum in New Orleans, evening light filtering through high windows, casting soft rays on polished hardwood floors as he placed the Erica typewriter at the center of a newly designed exhibit. He had spent months restoring it, cleaning metal, re-oiling joints, preserving the faded ribbon, yet leaving signs of wear, the dents, the uneven letters, the rust stains, because those imperfections were the voice of history. Alongside the typewriter were Clara's letters, Samuel's secret transcriptions, photographs showing a young nurse in uniform, maps with marginal notes, directions scrawled in ink, some letters incomplete, some words smudged, all arranged in glass cases, but with light and space enough so viewers could lean close, peer at the uneven print, read the edges, trace the outlines of faded initials. Ethan had named the exhibit "Words Between Keys: The Hidden War of Samuel Walker." He designed it so that visitors would move through chronological sections. First, Samuel's public life, his enlistment, his medals, the official wartime dispatches, then the private layer, Clara's letters, Samuel's hidden instructions, the coded messages under the ribbon. Then the legacy, how those secrets shaped the Walker family, how silence influenced Ethan's childhood, how the act of uncovering changed him. There were audio recordings, interviews with historians about unspoken love in wartime, with elderly neighbors who remembered Clara, with veterans who spoke of carrying names in silence. There was a soundscape in one room, typewriter clicks, distant thunder, a soft voice reading, "If I do not come back, tell Clara it was all worth it." The room was dim, only lit by the glow from the display cases, letting visitors feel both intimacy and weight. At the opening night, the museum was crowded. Veterans in uniform with medals pinned over their hearts, students taking notes, families holding hands, elderly women with tears in their eyes. Ethan's grandmother was there, wearing a shawl. When Ethan stepped forward to speak, his voice trembled slightly, but he held clear. "My grandfather, Samuel Walker, served his country. But in the service of that duty, he carried something more private: love, fear, hope. He hid messages, names, and feelings in the margins. Tonight, we bring them into light. Clara's name, Samuel's promise, our story." The crowd was silent. Someone in the back gasped. Light above the Erica, reflections dancing off its steel, brought something sacred into view. The exhibit opened to the public the next morning. Children peered into display cases, traced the letters in Samuel's file, asked their parents, "Who is Clara? Why didn't he tell?" Teachers organized trips. History classes came to learn not merely about battles and strategy, but about the human cost of war, the hidden lives, the choices people made when every word might be dangerous, every expression risky. Some visitors lingered at the photo of Clara in nurses' whites. Some stayed long at the wall featuring Samuel's typed fragment, "Your letters are lanterns in darkness." As days passed, letters came to the museum. from people who believed Clara might have survivors in their families, others from veterans who wrote about their own hidden loves, about letters never sent, about friends or sweethearts left behind, names unspoken. One elderly woman, voice cracking, told Ethan she'd known a nurse in San Diego during the war with the same name, Clara Walker, and shared a photograph. Ethan compared it to the exhibit's photo. It wasn't a match, but for that woman, the connection mattered, giving voice to her own long-buried memory. Ethan also wrote the companion book titled Keys That Held a War, sharing every fragment he found with photos, transcriptions, interviews, reflections. He dedicated it to the man who never told his story, but allowed it to be found. The book's pages showed the Erica's worn keys, the uneven surface of some type bars, the fragile ribbon with Samuel's initials, Clara's delicate script, the longing between the lines. It became used in history programs, in veterans groups, in writing workshops, in community libraries. People wrote essays discussing hidden histories, family secrets, how silence shapes identity. Ethan's grandmother, watching the book being read by strangers, saw faces turn as people recognized their own story. At a reading in Los Angeles, a woman approached Ethan after the talk, placed a hand on the Erica's glass case, whispered, "My mother waited for someone like him," then wept. In that moment, Ethan felt the weight lift, not because Clara was found or Samuel's story fully known, but because the story was spoken, shared, not hidden. The exhibit began traveling, first to Los Angeles, then to San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago. Each new city's hall hosted the Erica, the photos, the letters, the maps. Local veterans came, some quietly nodded, some thanked Ethan for naming Clara, for honoring the hidden love. In small towns, in large museums, Ethan saw people leave with changed faces, gratitude, curiosity, sometimes tears. And in that ripple, he understood what legacy means. Not forgetting, not shame, not hiding truth, but embracing complexity. At the closing of the first tour, Ethan stood alone late at night in a museum gallery, dim lights off, only the Erica glowing under a spotlight. He placed two items beside it. One, Clara's photograph, another, the fragile piece of ribbon with Samuel's final message. He pressed his hand gently against the glass, bowed his head. Then, sliding a fresh sheet of paper into the Erica, he typed slowly, deliberately, listening to the click of each key. "Now it is my turn to tell." He stepped back, light flickering, museum empty but heart full. Because stories like Samuel's, hidden for decades, now had voice. Because Clara's name was no longer a whisper, but part of memory. Because silence had been broken. And in that breaking, healing began. When Ethan's book, Keys That Held a War, was published in spring 2008, it felt like he was finally giving voice to the parts of his grandfather's life that had always been off-camera, hidden in shadows. The first print run sold quickly. Libraries ordered copies. History professors assigned pages of Samuel's coded messages alongside official wartime dispatches, not just to teach strategy, but to show what love, hope, and humility look like in war. The name Clara, once carried only on a faded label on a photograph and in whispered notes, was now printed in many hands, many voices, no longer an echo but part of many conversations. The Erica typewriter remains at the heart of the exhibit at the National Tune Museum. Its keys worn, its edges marred, its ribbon fragile. But the wear is part of its story. People lean forward, place a hand on the glass, trace letters with their eyes, noticing the small dents where Samuel's fingers must have paused, the slight misalignment in the type bars. They read Clara's letters, Samuel's hidden lines, see his initials under magnifying glass. Strangers weep, children ask questions, veterans nod knowingly. Ethan watches not to relive the past, but to see it redeemed, through recognition, through remembering. Ethan's grandmother, seated near the front of a reading event in Los Angeles, listened as an audience member read one of Samuel's letters aloud. Your letters are lanterns in darkness." Her hand rested on the exhibit case. Her voice trembled as she leaned to her grandson and whispered, "He carried more than duty. He carried a heart that never stopped hoping." And in that remark, there was relief for Samuel, who had never spoken of Clara publicly, for the unspoken sadness her absence carried, and for Ethan, who bridged silence and remembrance. The book became a touchstone, not just for personal history, but for how families reckon with hidden pasts. In schools, lectures, veterans groups, people discussed what it means to keep love in silence, to carry regret, to allow somebody's memory to be part of public memory, not just private sorrow. Postal letters arrived. Stories of nurses who served, of soldiers who never spoke of their own loves, of children who never knew someone named Clara in their house, but now recognized something real when they saw Samuel's ribbon, his typed lines, his promise. Exhibitions traveled. Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, Chicago, each with slight differences, new local stories intertwining with Samuel and Clara's. Artifacts borrowed, photographs reshared, community members stepping forward with their own lost names, their own secret correspondences. In each new city, Ethan spoke of love carried through danger, of promises that war tried to silence but could not erase, of how names matter, of how uncovering hidden stories doesn't dishonor those who lived in the silence, but honors their courage. And one evening, after the museum closed and the gallery lights were dimmed, Ethan stood quietly before the Erica, its keys under soft spotlight, its ribbon faintly illuminated and typed on a fresh sheet of paper. "Now it is my turn to tell." The room was empty, but the weight of many stories lingered there, spoken, remembered, alive. Because what Ethan realized is that legacy isn't just about preserving objects or documents, it's about restoring humanity. It's about saying, "I see you. I remember you." Even when silence seemed safer than speech, even when hope felt fragile, love endured. Clara's name endures. Samuel's heart endures. The typewriter's sound, the found messages, the uncovered letters, echoes beyond the metal and paper into memory. If this story moved you like it moved me writing it, please give a thumbs up and subscribe. It helps us keep sharing stories that inspire, that touch, that bring hidden truths to light.